I'm always thrilled when I am asked to do this, and I've been doing it for 7 years, but I was absolutely thrilled when Chris asked me to introduce Amy Greene, because I had first heard her on NPR when the book came out, and she said something about this was her first plane trip. And then when I started reading the book, I noticed that she had dedicated it to me. You'll notice in the dedication that it says, "and for Taylor," and I thought, wow, I haven't even met her. This is just so nice of her. So I knew from the very beginning it was going to be a kind of magical book, and I think that's the word that we've been using for the last couple of days. And as we said earlier, the Writers' Conference is going to be an enchanting time, and I don't think there's going to be any better person to kick off this event than Amy Greene, who writes of the magical Bloodroot Mountain. When I was looking at her bio, and if you look at her bio too, it's very short and very concise. It says that she still lives, that she was born in the foothills of East Tennessee. She still lives there with her husband and 2 children. That's about it. And I thought, well, that's a really short introduction. Then I went on to find out, and I actually got to hear her last night at the Tennessee Young Writers Conference, that Bloodroot is her first and only novel for which she received no rejection. It's also been described as an Appalachian Wuthering Heights. She likes Dollywood, and she spends each of her birthdays at Dollywood. She is also, on a more serious note, she was the Tennessee Writer of the Year for 2010. Bloodroot won the 2010 Weatherford Award for Fiction. Her inspiration comes from her Appalachian landscapes, Cormac McCarthy, Lee Smith, and others. She was once referred to as an exotic Tennessean. I don't know how many of us can say that. Bloodroot was listed on Amazon's Best Books of 2010, Book List Top 10 Debut Novels, and Circus Review's list of Best Debut Novels. If you haven't read this book, you're missing out. But without further ado, I'm going to give you Amy Greene to talk about Bloodroot. Thank you.
Up here, so maybe I should just
whatever you like.
Stand over here. Okay, well, I'll just move this stuff. And sorry, I'm slightly late. I've been wandering around the parking lot. I was here on time. Just had to take a tour of the campus before I got here. But I really want to thank you all for coming in. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to be reading from Bloodroot, and it is my first novel, my debut novel. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the book, and then I'll take questions. So be thinking about what you want to ask, because there's always this horrifying moment when I say, do you have any questions, and look out, and nobody has an answer. So please be kind and ask me some questions. Get your wheels turning while I'm talking. For those of you who haven't read Bloodroot, it's about a young woman named Myra Lynn who is raised by her grandmother. Can you hear? Can everybody hear me? Okay. She's raised by her grandmother on Bloodroot Mountain, and she's born with this gift that her grandmother calls the touch. It's been passed down through generations of their family, and it's a special way that she has of communing with animals and with nature. And when Myra's 17, she gets into a violent relationship with this man named John Odom that ends up affecting not only the rest of her life, but the lives of her grandmother and her twins, Johnny and Laura. And I think that the question I've probably been asked most when I've traveled around is, what inspired me to write Bloodroot? And so much of my inspiration is the beauty of the Appalachian landscape, just the mountains and farmland and creek banks of where I come from. I grew up in a rural part of East Tennessee in Hamlin County. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of it. I never say where I really come from, which is Bulls Gap, because nobody's ever heard of Bulls Gap.
I have. I'm from Newport.
Okay. Everybody's in here, so she knows. But for those of you, then you know that Bulls Gap is the birthplace of Archie Campbell, and his birthplace museum is there. So I always say I'm the biggest thing to come out of Bulls Gap since Archie Campbell. So that's sort of my claim to fame. But I just think there's a real intimacy with nature that comes with being from Appalachia and being from the mountains of East Tennessee. And as a little girl, even, I really just embraced the natural world, and I spent a whole lot of my childhood just exploring the woods and hills around the house that I grew up in. And Bloodroot Birdie talks about loving the mountain as much as she does any of her kin, and that's really the way that I feel about it. When people talk about the strong sense of place in Bloodroot, I think what they're feeling is just the love of home that flowed into it. And besides the landscape, I've also been really inspired by the folklore of Appalachia. I grew up hearing all these stories from my parents, who are sort of natural storytellers, about witches and fortune tellers and haints. And one of my favorite scenes in Bloodroot to write, and I read it last night at the Young Writers Workshop, is where Clifford blows down Birdie's throat to heal her thrush. And that's based on a story that my dad tells about his mom taking his baby sister to the man in the neighborhood who'd never laid eyes on his father. I don't know why that matters, but and he healed her thrush that way by blowing down her throat. And my mom had an aunt who would take off her warts by rubbing stones in a circle around each one and throwing the stones away. I see people nodding. This is so nice. When I'm in Tennessee, people actually have heard these stories, and they go. When I'm in, San Francisco, people look at me blankly and have no idea what I think I'm crazy. But they would throw the stones away, and the advice that I was given was never to pick up a bag along the road because it could be somebody's warts. I'm going to pass that along to you now. That is, never pick up a bag. My mom also had a witch living down the road from her named Holdy, who would read the neighbors' fortunes in the coffee grounds in the bottoms of their cups. And in Bloodroot, I named the witch Luann. And she's the one who puts a curse on her family that won't be lifted until there's a baby born in their line with haint blue eyes. And a haint, if you're not familiar with the term, is what we call a spirit in the mountains. And spirits aren't supposed to be able to cross water, so that vivid aqua color is supposed to pull them away. And if you drive around the back roads of East Tennessee, very often you're apt to see windowsills and doors painted that aqua color. And that kind of folk magic has been practiced here going all the way back to the 1700s, when the settlers came over from Scotland and Ireland. And it's still part of our culture, of mountain culture today, but it is a little bit worrisome to think if all the old granny women die off and all the young people move on, then some of our mountain heritage might be lost. There is definitely a younger generation that's coming up that's much more reliant on science and technology and on mysticism. But I can only hope that by writing about it, I'm at least doing a little something to help preserve it. So I'm going to read a passage now from Birdie's part of the book. And she's the grandmother of Myra. And she talks here about the mountain mysticism that she grew up around and passes down to her granddaughter. All the neighbors thought the world of Grandma and her sisters. It was what you call granny women. And the people of Chickweed Hollow relied on them for any kind of help you can think of. Each one of them had different gifts. Myrtle was what I've heard called a water witch. She could find a well on anybody's land with her dowsing rod. People sent for her from a long ways off. Sometimes they'd come together and she'd fetch the porch branch she kept under her bed and hop in their wagon. She'd be gone for days at a time, depending on how hard of a trip it was. Della was the best one at mixing up cures. She could name any root and herb and flower you pointed at. Another thing she was good for was healing animals. She could set the broke leg of the orneriest hunting dog, and it wouldn't even bite her. One day I seen her in the yard bent over the wash tub scrubbing, and a bird lit on her shoulder. It stayed there for a long time. If she noticed, she didn't let on. I stood still, trying not to scare it away. When I told Grandma about it later, she said animals are attracted to our kind of people, and so are other people of our kind. She winked and said, "Don't be surprised if the fellow you marry has the touch. People with the touch draws one another." I've always remembered that, but I don't reckon Macon had none of the gifts that Grandma and her sisters had. I didn't either. It's odd how the touch moves in a family. You never can tell who'll turn up with it. Grandma had the best gift of all. She claimed she could send her spirit up out of her body. She said, you could lock me up in the jailhouse or burn me alive down under the ground. It don't matter where this old shell is at. My soul will fly off wherever I want it to be. She told me about a time she fell down in a sinkhole when she was little and couldn't climb back out. She'd wandered far from the house and knowed her Mammy and Pappy couldn't hear her. She looked up at the sun between the roots hanging down like dirty hair and wished so hard to fly up out of there that her spirit took off, rose, and soared on back to her little house in the holler. That's when she figured out what her gift was. She had no memory of being stuck in a hole that day. What she remembered was watching her Mammy roll out biscuit dough and romping with her puppy dog and picking daisies to braid a crown. Grandma wasn't even hollering when a man out hunting came along and his dog sniffed her out. That's the gift I wish I had. I'd go back to Chickweed Hollow right now and see if everything still looks the same. And besides the folklore of Appalachia, I've also been inspired by my own path in life. As I mentioned, I grew up in a rural community, and most of the people that I knew, including my own parents, were either farmers or factory workers. And going to school made me realize that we didn't have as much as a lot of other people. And I had decided early on that I was going to get a scholarship to college and move off to the big city to be a writer. And I even had Boston picked out because that's where the New Kids on the Block lived. I don't know if you know the New Kids on the Block, but I was going to marry Jordan, and so that's where I was going to, that's where I was going to live. But I thought of myself as a black sheep in my community and at school. And then when I was 15, I met my husband, Adam. He's back there taking pictures. He's my paparazzi. And he was creative like me, and we could talk to each other about things that nobody else around us seemed to care about. And when I was 18, we decided that we wanted to get married. And when I'm speaking to students, I always say, do not do that. I do not recommend it. Not a good idea. But I really felt that I was supposed to be with him, and it was what was right for me, and so we did it. And I was supposed to be a rebel, and here I was following in the footsteps of my mom and my aunts who got married when they were teenagers. But it was really hard and scary, especially when I found out at 19 that I was going to have a baby. And at that time, I felt a lot of fear and a lot of shame, too. I wondered what people would think of me being so young and already married and with a baby on the way. I wanted people to know that on the inside, I was still a black sheep, and I still wanted to be a writer. But of course, after my son was born, I didn't have as much time to write. And it was my mom who really helped me through that. And not only by helping me to take care of the baby, but she also gave me a lot of good life advice. She told me that she was scared too when she got married at 18 and found out at 19 that she was going to have a baby. But she also said that the thing that she wanted more than anything else in the world was to have a family. She hadn't followed tradition by marrying him. She followed her heart, and that's what I did. And I'm still married to Adam, and we have 2 kids now. We have a 15-year-old son named Taylor. I'm sorry, it wasn't you. But I do love you, though. And I have a 9-year-old daughter named Emma. And if I had run off to the big city and married Jordan, all that, like I planned, I don't know if I would have ever realized how much where I come from has made me a better person and a better writer. Because I've been able to use so much of my own experience, especially in writing Bloodroot, and especially in the scene that I'm about to read to you, where Myra's kids are taken away from her and put into foster care. And it's told from the point of view of one of her twins, Laura, but it shows how losing them is just too much for a mom to take. 3 days after the church ladies looked in our window, 2 other cars came up the hill, one with a light on top. The man who got out looked a little bit like Mr. Barnett, so I thought he might be nice. Johnny grabbed my arm and said, "Let's hide." He tried to drag me off, but I was hungry. I stayed in case that man had oranges like Mr. Barnett run at Christmas time. There was a heavy-set woman with papers, too. I watched them walk toward the house. Johnny stood beside me. The man went up to the front door and knocked, and he noticed us and came over. I seen too late that his hands was empty. "Is your mother home?" he asked, bending down to talk to us. Right when he asked, I seen her stepping out of the woods with a string of fish. Her legs was wet and specked with grass. There was a leaf stuck to her ankle. When she seen the car, she froze in her tracks. The man followed my eyes and turned around. He asked, "Are you Myra Odom?" When Mama didn't answer, he went on talking. "We're with the Department of Children's Services, ma'am. I need to speak with you for a minute." Mama let the fish slither to the ground. Their bellies flashed in the sun. Then she was running toward us. "Don't let them touch you," she said to me and Johnny, her voice jogging up and down. Before them people knowed what was happening, she had took me and Johnny by the shoulders and herded us into the house. The man and woman tried to follow us, but Mama was too quick. She slammed the door shut in their faces. Mama knelt on the floor and gathered me and Johnny up. I could feel her shaking. We watched the door as the man pounded on it. "Open up, Mrs. Odom. I've got an order here from the court." We knelt for a long time in the front room with the furniture left from some life Mama had without us. We hardly ever sat on that couch or them chairs, but there was hours. Some way it felt like that knocking was taking our things away from us. It was the longest I could remember Mama holding me and Johnny in a long time. Her body heaved up and down. Her smell, like fish and creek water, filled the room. When the knocking quit, she got still between us. Her arm clamped tighter around me, but Johnny slipped out of her grip. She snatched after him, but he didn't come back. She stayed there on her knees with me. He stood at the window, white and thin, with hair like a pile of blackbird wings. I asked, "Are they gone, Johnny?" He said no, and that was all. We waited some more, and Johnny finally came back to wait with us. He crouched beside Mama, but not close enough to touch. I don't know how much time went by, but the knocking came again. Then another voice. "This is the police, Mrs. Odom. You better come on out." For a while, it was quiet again. This time, I didn't ask if they was gone. Mama stood up and started walking back and forth. Her bare feet creaked on the floorboards. She cracked her knuckles and tore at her fingernails with her teeth. After a while, she got to muttering under her breath. I couldn't make out the words, but she didn't sound like a person anymore. Johnny and me hugged each other. Her voice got bigger and bigger. Slobber strained on her chin. She walked back and forth faster and faster until she was just about running. Then she was yanking at her hair. Clumps of it trailed from her fingers. I wanted to close my eyes, but some way I couldn't. Johnny got mad and screamed, "Stop it! Stop it!" He covered his eyes like I wanted to, but my eyes just kept following Mama back and forth. Then the loudest pounding came. A different voice hollered, "This is the Polk County Sheriff's Department. Open the door." Mama rushed at me and Johnny and swooped us up, one under each arm. She ran with us to the back room. She put us down rough, and my sides felt sore. She threw open the window, and the smell of outside and birdsong came in. "Go on," she whispered at Johnny. Her eyes was red, her mouth was wet. I thought Johnny wouldn't go. He was shaking his head, but he must have got scared not to mind Mama. He climbed up on the dresser. He looked back at me once and disappeared out the window. I was bawling out loud then. The pounding hurt my ears. Mama turned and knelt down by her bed. She reached into the mattress and pulled out the box. A puff of dirty stuffing came out behind it. She shoved the box in my hand, but my fingers didn't want to close around it. Mama made them. She pressed them so hard around the wood that it hurt. That's when I heard the front door breaking open. She lifted me under the arms and pushed me towards the window. "Run," she said. Johnny wasn't gone. He was crouched under the window. I knelt down with him, and we listened to Mama's screams and things breaking as she fought. We couldn't leave her, even if she had left us so many times. After the fighting was over, it didn't take them long to find me and Johnny huddled there. By then, Mama was gone from us forever. Now that everybody's good and depressed, I'll try to read something a little bit lighter, this next passage. And besides what inspired me to write Bloodroot, another thing that I'm asked pretty often is whether I did a lot of research before I started. And I talked about this a little bit last night. And the truth is that I really didn't. I didn't do a lot of research. Bloodroot started with this image I had of this woman with black hair and blue eyes hiding in the mountain woods with her twins from some kind of danger. And I was interested in exploring the characters more than anything else. I just picked up my pen and started writing. And I didn't really know if a story would evolve. I just kind of found the story through the characters. And what I wanted to tell had been with me my whole life, I think, because I've always seen the complexity of living in Appalachia, both the beauty and the harshness. I probably shouldn't, but I do read the customer reviews on Amazon, and most of them are positive, but one of them that stood out is that said that Bloodroot is like a long country music song with all the sadness and heartache, but I say that those country music songs are based on real life too, just like Bloodroot is. But there is a lot of heartbreak in Appalachia, a lot of struggle, but there's also a lot of strength and hope and humor in the people who live there. And the first draft of Bloodroot was fairly easy to write because I was able to use the voices of the people that I've known and loved my whole life for my characters. And the grandmother Birdie was especially easy because she's sort of this composite of the women who raised me. My mom and my aunts and all the sweet old ladies that I went to church with. But John Odom, who's Myra's abusive husband, was definitely the hardest to get right because I had to try to show him, show his dimensions and his conflicting emotions and not make him just a cartoon villain, and sort of portray him as a tortured soul as well. And when my husband travels with me to bookstores, I actually had somebody ask me if I was abused like Myra. And so I had to, and I hope I'm not spoiling anything, but for those of you who have read the book, you'll know that what I mean when I say that I had Adam to hold up his hand and show that he had all of his fingers and everything. But yes, he does not abuse me. And you know, a lot of times you write to understand and to make sense of things. And because I didn't have a relationship like that, but I have seen those kinds of dark relationships from the outside where you just want to take the woman and shake her and tell her to wake up. I kind of wanted to explore that and think about that. And you know, it was hard to make it believable that John believed that he could love her and hurt her at the same time. And that was just one of the many challenges in bringing these characters to life on the page. And I wanted to think about whether a love like that is destined for a tragic end or if they could have chosen a different outcome. And to an extent, John and Myra and people like them are products of their upbringing, but they do have free will. So I'm going to read another passage now from Myra's perspective, showing how desperate she was to have John after the first time she saw him, enough that she resorts to using an old charm that the witch Luann claimed was supposed to bring a woman love. I stepped into the sun holding the wrinkled brown sack, sharp with nail points, and stopped in my tracks. A boy and girl stood outside the door in a patch of shade, kissing each other in a hungry way I'd never seen before. A tingle darted through me. I couldn't see much of the boy's face, but I could see his hair, black as pitch, and her pale fingers digging into the dent between his shoulder blades. Then the girl cracked her eyes and noticed me. She broke away from him with a start. He turned around and I dropped the sack, nails spraying everywhere on the cracked cement. I knelt to pick them up, cheeks on fire. I'd seen his face, as sinister and beautiful. Before I could register what was happening, it was coming to kneel beside me. "Let me help you with that, miss," he said. His voice was like a silk ribbon unrolling. Our fingers touched, and when I glanced up, I thought I saw a flicker of interest in his eyes. Then the girl was saying, "I'd better get on back to work, John. My dad'll skin me alive." He rose and went to her as Granny and Mr. Barnett were coming out of the store. "I'll walk you," he said. When he looked back over his shoulder at me, my legs felt made of something unreliable. I watched them go, taking in the shape of his body, tall with narrow hips and wide shoulders. "Who was that?" I asked, following Greene to the truck. "That's John," Mr. Barnett said. "One of Frankie's boys. You don't want nothing to do with him. I reckon he's tomcatting around with that Ellen Hamilton now. Our daddy's got a drugstore down here on the corner. But you ought to hear the stories John's brothers tells on him. They claim he's got a girlfriend for every day of the week. I reckon it's pitiful how he does them girls. There was one tried to kill herself over him." I was so quiet on the way home that Granny asked if I was sick. It didn't matter what Mr. Barnett had said about John. I couldn't stop seeing his eyes, the hair that fell across his forehead when he knelt by me, the beauty of his face like something carved from marble. I never knew there were real people in the world that looked like him. Mr. Barnett let us out of his truck at the house. Walking across the yard, Granny said, "Let's have chicken and dumplings for supper." I stood under the apple tree while she killed and plucked the chicken, trying to cool my face in the shade. After a while, I followed her up the steps and into the kitchen. When I saw the chicken's carcass laid out on the counter, it seemed like a sign. The instant Granny went to the pantry, I tore into the bird's chest and pulled out its heart. I crammed it into my mouth, and it was awful. Small and slick, sliding down my throat. I coughed and gagged, the heart struggling to come back up, but I was determined to choke it down. When Granny rushed over to pound on my back, I said, "It's okay, I just got strangled on spit." I felt guilty for betraying Granny. If she'd known what I'd done, she would have been disappointed in me. But there was no going back. I didn't know if I believed in Luann's charm, but I knew now what those women had felt. I wasn't worried about Ellen Hamilton or anybody else. I was only concerned with myself and what I had to have. I went to bed early that night, half sick from the chicken heart, but I couldn't rest. I tossed and turned, thinking how he looked over his shoulder at me as he walked the blonde girl back to work. It was like being possessed. When I finally closed my eyes and drifted down towards sleep, I dreamed his face hovered inches from mine in the dark, his long sculpted body floating over my bed like an angel or a wraith. I opened my eyes with a start, prepared to be kissed like he had kissed Ellen Hamilton on the sidewalk. I promised myself if he ever did kiss me that way, I'd kiss him back twice as hard. Now the ghost of John is different. It has no face or body, just the shine of eyes. Last night I saw them in a tree and thought he was there. Then something moved along the branch and hissed down at me, a red-eyed possum. But sometimes I wake up smelling sulfur and dead rats and sweet aftershave. My bedroom reeks of him, and I know he's been there watching me sleep. Once I walked in and saw him sitting in the rocking chair. I dropped my book but didn't scream. He was there for a long second, and I thought he would say something. Then I blinked, and he was gone, the rocking chair empty. These days, John could come to me in any form. Long shadows falling across the yard could be the shape of tree trunks or of his legs. Claw-tipped branches could be his arms. Dripping water could be his tapping fingers. Cold drafts could be his breath. But back then, when I was 17, I wanted every noise to be John Odom coming after me in the dark. When I read that, people ask me if I've ever swallowed a chicken heart. And the answer is no, I did not write that book experience. So in the process of working on Bloodroot, I realized that I was asking questions about my characters that I've asked about my own self, like how much inheritance shapes who we become and how we end up, and whether or not childhood suffering causes someone to inflict pain and suffering on other people. And I wanted to explore whether characters like John Odom are cruel by nature, they've been formed by childhood abuse, and whether strong characters like Johnny and Laura can overcome their circumstances and find happiness. And I wanted to show how it can be a struggle to forge your own identity, especially in Appalachia, where the pull is so strong to follow tradition and live the way that your parents did and your grandparents did. But as hard as it is to overcome those inherited traits and circumstances, I intended for Johnny and Laura to be proof in the end that it is possible. So I'm going to close now with this brief passage with Myra and her children standing on top of Bloodroot Mountain and looking down at the world below. and she's thinking about all the things that she wants them to know. If they were older, I know what I would tell them. You might leave, but one day your blood will whisper to you. You'll hear witches making magic in a holler, healing wind blowing down a swollen throat, the song of the woman who came here in a mule-drawn cart and made it home. One of these days, wherever you are, you'll turn around and look toward the mountain, old and wild and bigger than you. You'll look this way and know it's still alive, whether I am or not anymore. I was only thinking the words, but the girl came to me as if she'd heard them out loud. She reached up and I swung her onto my hip. Look, Mama, she said, pointing at the world below. Can I go down yonder? I thought of Granny taking my itchy foot in her hand and ached with loneliness. Yes, honey, I said, but you'll come back. Just like me, you'll always come home. Thank you. About your questions so that we don't have that awkward moment where nobody raises their hand. Oh, yay!
Was your region or your in general or your locale in particular, did you have any racial diversity that impacted your story in any way? I didn't hear it.
Yeah, it really, I think I really wrote about my vision of Appalachia and where I came from, and there's not a lot of racial diversity at all. I think that the elementary school that I went to was 95% white, and that was kind of the world that I lived in. And there was I actually wrote about a restaurant in Oak Ridge where, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Oak Ridge, that was run by a black couple, and my editor told me that because there was no racial diversity throughout the story, that it was best to leave it out. So I thought that was a really interesting thought on her behalf, and I trusted her judgment on that. But I think that's kind of part of Appalachia. There's this isolating effect that the mountains have, and you live in these sort of, and it's part of what preserves, I think, the folklore and you know, this sort of, it's a beautiful thing, but at the same time it does prevent that kind of diversity, I think. So you do live a sort of sheltered life in the mountains. Anybody else?
Just in brief, how long did it take you to write the book? And tell us something about your publishing experience, please.
Okay. It took me really altogether about 2 years to write the book. And the first year, I wrote the very first rough draft when I was really kind of just exploring the characters. I wrote that longhand in a notebook, and that's the way I always write the first draft, because I think there's this sort of intimacy with that pen to paper experience. And of course, as I was trying to polish it up and make it readable, then I started working on the computer. But it was another year of editing. The editing process was it felt grueling to me and long at the time, but I definitely consider that a big part of writing the book. And as for my publishing experience, it's not typical because I was blessed not to have experienced a lot of rejection. Because I went to the Sewanee Writers Conference with the rough draft of Bloodroot, and I was almost finished. I was about 50 pages away from being finished. And prior to that, I've been writing my whole life since I was in the first grade, but I'd never really pursued publishing actively, never tried to really have short stories published or anything like that, because I don't write short stories. The novel is my passion and about the only thing I'm good at. So I took Bloodroot to Sewanee, and I met a writer there named Jill McCorkle. I don't know how many of you are familiar with her, but she's a wonderful writer from North Carolina and one of my favorite writers. And she was my workshop leader there, and she saw enough promise in that rough draft of Bloodroot that she offered to put me in touch with an agent when I finished. And so I went home and finished it quickly so that she wouldn't forget that she had said that. And so within just a few months of Sewanee, this is where my Dollywood story comes in, because I was at Dollywood. I had made my annual pilgrimage to Dollywood with my cell phone, and Lee Feldman, the agent that I contacted, or that Jill contacted on my behalf, who is a wonderful New York agent. She's represented Charles Frazier and Arthur Golden, who wrote Memoirs of a Geisha, called me, and I was really trying to hide the fact that I was at Dollywood because I thought it would make me unsophisticated. So I was trying to hide from the music and trying to get away and, you know, be very, I don't know what I was trying to do, something that I wasn't, I guess. But, and then the train came through and the whistle blew really loud and the jig was up. So I had to tell her, she asked me if I was on a train, so I had to tell her, no, I'm at Dollywood. But that was in October, the day before my 32nd birthday, and within a month I had a book deal with Knopf, and it was this kind of whirlwind experience. And what happened was Lee told me, I'm going to send Bloodroot to a list of 10 major publishers, and she gave me the list, and Knopf, they're my dream publisher because they published Cormac McCarthy and Toni Morrison and so many of my favorites. So I don't know what I expected, but I definitely didn't expect what happened. She told me that it would probably take about a month for editors to respond, and then she said, if you hear from me before a week is up, or if you hear from me before the month is up, you know, expect it to be a rejection, because I did tell her I wanted to hear everything, even rejections. And so when I saw her number come up on the caller ID before a week had passed, I assumed I was trying to steel myself to be graceful, you know, about my rejection. But she said that Robin Desser, who is my editor now at Knopf, had called to make a preemptive offer on Bloodroot, which means that she felt strongly enough about it that she wanted us to withdraw the offer from all the other publishing houses, which was a dream come true situation, because it meant that she loved the book enough that, I mean, there was no doubt that she was the person who should have it and who I should work with. And so, and to this day, the experience with her, while it's been hard, it's been wonderful, because she pushes me. She cares enough to keep pushing me to write the best book I can write. And that's why I say the editing process with her is very much part of writing the book, and I consider that, you know, when people ask me how long it took, I always consider that when I'm giving an answer, because, you know, when she got a hold of it, so to speak, and that's not to say that she tells me what to do, or is in fact, she has a very light hand as an editor, and what she asks me is, you know, this isn't clear, so you need to make this make sense. And she's not a line editor where she goes in and says, you know, you need to change this and strike this line, but she's a caring editor who really will say, no, this isn't good enough, and send me back to the drawing board, which is frustrating, but a really good thing. Yeah.
During your childhood years in the Appalachian, what year was that?
I was born in 1975, so I grew up in the 80s, or started to grow up in the 80s. My childhood was in the 80s, and then, you know, in the 90s I was a teenager, and so when people read Bloodroot, I think they feel, and sometimes ask me how, you know, having grown up in the era that I did and being young, how do I write about, you know, the Depression era, and I think what's interesting about that isolating effect that I was talking about earlier is that it does feel, it gives Appalachia a little bit of an out of time feeling, and I kind of wanted to convey that with Bloodroot. So I didn't ground it so much in time or even in specific, you know, place in Appalachia. I didn't write about Bulls Gap, which is where I grew up. I wanted to kind of, you know, give my own vision of Appalachia as a whole, and but I definitely think that things move at a slower pace where I live, and the rest of the world takes a little while for the rest of the world to come in. And so I didn't really grow up, even though most kids my age were probably growing up with computers and MTV. I really didn't grow up that way at all. I didn't have cable until I married Adam, and he swept me off to the metropolis of Morristown, which was like 10 minutes down the road from where I lived. And then I, you know, had all the conveniences, but. Yeah.
Did you work from an outline, or how did you keep your storyline straight as you were working on it for such a long time?
I probably should have used an outline. Probably would make things easier if I were more organized, but I just really try to write when I feel like it, and and I have these periods where I write sort of furiously and just get it all out, especially in that first draft. And I did kind of just write these elaborate character sketches first almost, and kind of sort of found the story that way. So in the end, because it was so disorganized and I had these multiple narrators that all felt so important to me and felt as though I couldn't lose any of them, because while Myra was the heart of the story, I felt like all these narrators had something to say about her. But it ended up being a gargantuan and grueling task to kind of tie all these disparate threads together into a cohesive story. So I did end up, and with the second novel, which is with my editor right now, I did try to be a bit more organized and to write it in a more of a linear way this time, because it really was hard to do in my disorganized way.
The way your writing just flows, did you have to work at that, or did it just sort of pour out of you like that?
It really this time, in this case, and I think it's because I did kind of hear those voices, in my head. And I made the mistake of saying that voices were in my head and that I heard them when I was on TV in Memphis. And I came off, and some of the ladies behind the scenes were like, "Honey, did you just say you have voices in your head?" I had to explain, I'm not schizophrenic. What I mean is, I just know those voices so well that they really did just kind of flow onto the page. Especially the characters of Bertie and Laura, who do speak with more, of the dialect, I guess. And Johnny and Myra, whose voices are more formal, I guess you could say, were of course harder, and I had to be more polished with them. But some of the voices really just flowed, and it really was this process of kind of pouring my heart out on paper. And that's why when you do come to the point where you realize the book is going to be released into the world, and that it's such a vulnerability that you're faced with, and it's a really scary process when it does flow like that, and it really is coming, from your heart and your soul. Then it makes it a little bit harder when you kind of are offering it up for public consumption. Yeah.
Was that your original title?
It was. It really was. And the way that I found the title, that was a big turning point for me in realizing the themes of the story, and it really kind of tied the story together for me and helped me to flesh out what I really wanted to say with the book. And the way that I found the title was I was really just at first trying to think of a name for the mountain that they lived on, and I was thinking about what would grow and be indigenous there. And I'd heard of bloodroot because it does grow in the hills behind the house that I grew up in. But when I looked it up and really started doing some research on what the flower is, it's this beautiful, I don't know if any of you are familiar with bloodroot, the flower, but it's this delicate flower that kind of grows in the shade. It's white with these really, it kind of is very finicky, and then the first rain goes away, but it's the first flower of spring, and it grows in the shade in the mountains of Appalachia. But when you pull the flower up, the root is kind of thick and fleshy, almost like a finger. And if you cut it or break it, it bleeds red sap. And the sap has healing properties. People use it to put on warts and to cure gingivitis, and even to try to treat cancer. So, but if taken in the wrong dosage, it has the ability to poison you as well. It can be a really dangerous thing. So it was this kind of paradoxical, flower. And so, and it held in it kind of that complexity, and the way that I see Appalachia, really, both that beauty and that kind of harshness and that juxtaposition. So, and of course, it's all there even in the name of the flower, bloodroot. So it was just, it felt like the perfect title. So it really was there from almost the beginning, not before I started writing, but very early on.
It's always interesting to me to note that there are people from the same community, and I think it sounds like yours was pretty insular, that can sort of be attuned to many different things. You ended up being a writer, but I'm guessing probably that there were some kids at your school who sort of subscribed to that particular lifestyle, became farmers or worked in the factories. Can you identify, this is speculation, but can you identify maybe some forces or influences for you that separated your interests from remaining sort of in that society?
I think the difference with me was that although my dad worked in a furniture factory until he retired, and my mom, you know, she pulled tobacco and she cleaned houses and she did all, and we lived on a farm that had been my grandfather's for years. So I had the same general background. But my dad is a wonderful painter still to this day. And while he would have never have thought of going to art school because he would have thought it was impractical, and I think it's just the generation and that people have this idea that you can't make a career in the arts and all that. The great thing is that both my parents, neither of them ever discouraged me or said, you can't be a writer. There's no money in it or anything like that. And so, in fact, they were so proud of everything that I wrote, and they had no doubt. So I really attribute it to them and them not telling me, as they were probably told, as my dad in particular was probably told, you can't have a family, you can't make a living as an artist, so you need to go work in the furniture factory. And I think that was a huge difference. It was very much in my parents, and I mean, I can't thank them enough for that. Yeah.
Are there any particular writers who have influenced you in this book? In your writing of it,
Yes.
Writers who wrote about Appalachia and so on.
Yes, absolutely. When I was in my 20s, I read All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy for the first time. And that was a turning point in my writing life because that was sort of the moment when I realized, because he's from Knoxville, and the dialogue that he wrote, the characters sounded like people that I knew. And, you know, it was like they could have been my neighbors. And so that was a big moment for me because I saw that it was possible to write about home and to write about people that I knew. And one of the books that really kind of spurred Bloodroot in particular was Oral History by Lee Smith, because she actually writes that book. I'm sure a lot of you have probably read that one, but she writes that from the first person perspective. She has multiple narrators, and she writes it in dialect. So to see that being done, I think sometimes something has to give you the courage to do what you want to do. And seeing that done and done so well by Lee Smith was also another big moment for me that kind of let me know I could write something like Bloodroot and succeed at it. So those were two major influences.
So we have a 9:40 session, and we want you to be able to buy Amy's book and get her to sign it for you. So anyway, thank you, Amy.
Thank you.